Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today I'm going to make a quilt with one big block. This one big block is going to be a baby quilt. The one big block baby quilt is going to use 8 fat quarters, and that's all. This one big block baby block, this one big block baby quilt with 8 fat quarters is going to use templates so that we can maximize our fabric. This quilt is definitely easier to make than it is to say. Because this quilt is made with templates, I will put the templates in the description. So be sure to print them out at 100% and check that 1-inch square to make sure that they're the right size. Now the one piece is going to be bigger than one sheet of paper, so we're going to have to put that together. So we're going to be able to match up those lines, glue that together or tape it together, and then cut them out. I'm going to show you a little tip on how to cut out these shapes even before we begin. Here is one of the shapes that I want to cut out. The dark line will be the sewing line, and that lighter line is going to be the seam allowance. But everyone's seam allowance is slightly different. So I would recommend that you check your seam allowance and add what your 1/4 inch is. If your 1/4 inch is the same as a ruler, cut it out, not following that light dotted line, but our darker line. So line up the ruler so that we have a 1/4 inch past that dark line. And with an old blade, cut that off. So I still have that 1/4 inch. It's just more accurate. Go around and do all the pieces that way. The pattern pieces also have those little corners cut off. So we could just cut right on those light lines. For each block, I'm going to need a corner for a half square triangle, another triangle, and that's going to be a big corner, a third triangle, and then that piece that we need to tape together. I just put a line in the center so that I had that center mark. One other line I'm going to put on this is a line running down that center. That center line is going to help me line up fabric. There's one other piece that I'm going to need, and you probably will not need to make a template out of it. It is a big rectangle, and the size is 5.5 inches by 13 inches. Even though we have some very standard shapes for templates, this is going to help us lay out the fabric. It's going to help us have those corners match, and there'll be no trimming down. These are exact pieces. And that is what's going to make this go together really quickly, plus the way we're going to be able to cut it. What we are making is a very large Lemoyne star. And we're going to be able to cut 4 fat quarters together at the same time. But a very important thing to do is make sure our fabric is very well pressed and starched or some kind of a starch alternative. So I have 4 of my fat quarters all matched, pressed together, and the fabrics are all facing down. By cutting these 4 pieces together, it's going to give me 2 corners. So I'll only have to do that twice. So we have a 15-inch side and that larger 22-inch side. The first thing we need to do is cut off that selvage. And that's that 15-inch side. Just with our cutter, we can cut a piece 5.5 inches. I can now square this up to 13 inches. I now have 4 template shapes, and this is where we're going to be able to lay them out the way that we want. I'm going to line up the long edges along that fresh cut edge because I have not moved this fabric. This big piece from here, I can cut one piece out at a time if I want to center some pieces in. But for this particular stack, the piece that I want to center is this piece here, so I do not need to worry about centering the other ones. They're just patterns. So I'm going to be able to just move this around until I get the shape that I want. I do want that along the straight of grain, so I know where my layout is going to be. But it's really hard to cut around these because they have a tendency to move. So a little tape is going to help. If we have two-sided tape, we can just put a little two-sided tape on the back or roll up some Scotch tape. I do have two-sided tape, so I'm going to just put that on the back. By having that two-sided tape on here, it's going to just make it easier for us to cut because we will be using the ruler. So now they're really stuck on here. It's going to be easier for me to use a rotary cutter. I'm not going to be using measurements. I'm going to be using the paper as a guide. I'm cutting 4 pieces at a time, but you can cut 1 layer, 2 layers, whatever you feel comfortable doing. Now I'm just going to follow my lines, carefully line up that edge, and cut. So I have my pieces cut out. I need to cut 4 more of these shapes. So just carefully peel that paper off. Make a note on which one is going to be the half square triangle. Put these pieces aside and get my next stack going. So I do have 4 stacked up here. That way I'm only cutting these templates out twice. This is all I need for the entire quilt. I have 8 of each of these shapes. When I did press my layers together, I pressed them in order as I'm going to want them to be sewn. For example, each corner is only going to consist of 2 fabrics. And I'm only going to build 1 corner at a time, so I will take my top 2 fabrics and put the rest away. So the easiest way to start to put this together in a layout is to lay our 2 diamonds out. The larger B triangles are going to go in this point. So I'll just lay them out like that. Along these 2 longer ends, the C's are going to fit in. And that is 1 corner of a Lemoyne star. So I've matched up my fabrics so each 2 are going to go together. This particular Lemoyne star is going to have a built-in border. And that's where the 5.5 inch by 13 are going to come in. They're going to go here. The half square triangle will go in the corner. So I will be making 4 of these units. Just by looking at this, we can pretty much see how we need to put this together. We do not want to do any set-in seams. So let's take that apart in the center, which means I can sew these 2 parts together. I can sew those 2 edges on, but I'm going to start with that short one. I'm going to do this side. I'm going to put it together the same way. By having those pieces cut out as templates, we can see how all of these corners are going to go together. I can now just bring this to the machine and sew my 1/4 inch. Now, one little tip. If you did not test your machine out, you can always test it out now. Put the paper down on the machine and make sure that that seam is running right along that 1/4 inch. Once those seams have been sewn, I bring them and I put them back. I know this is an extra step, but it really saves making a mistake. I'm going to have all of the seams be impressed in one direction. And I'm going to have them coming towards me. So this seam will come this way, and this is going to come. Everything is coming down. But I'm not going to use an iron. I did press them and starch them. So just with my fingernail and my hand, I'm going to press those seams over. At this stage, this will never see the iron until I'm totally done. We can now put the bee on, and that's going to go on both sides. And to press these seams, I'm going to press to the dark. Once again, just with my hands. And so on those side pieces. And for the pressing on these, I'm going towards the dark so they're opposing. Now when I match up this seam, all of those seams are going to nestle together. We now have one entire quarter of the quilt done. Now I'm going to do another quarter. I have my piles put together in two, and I'm going to choose what I would consider my light and my dark and place them right over top of what I would consider my light and my dark. This will definitely help us keep the lights and darks in the same order. That second corner is now ready to be stitched together, and I'm going to stitch it the same way. So I'm going to do one quarter at a time. That first corner that I did, I want to duplicate the pressing. So laying it on top really is going to help me remember what I did. The whole key of putting these together was, number one, starting with very well pressed fabric, starching or use a starch alternative to give that fabric some stability, and then don't touch it with the iron anymore. Just finger press it and let the machine do all the work. I'm going to do those 4 quarters and I'll be right back. My light and dark quarters are all done. And each of these quarters does equal to be an 18-inch square. Now we get to sew them together. Those 4 quarters are simply going to be sewn together in those centers and then down into that main area. Once I have those last seams done, I can now bring it to the iron and press it. By not pressing it each stage of the way and only finger pressing means we did not distort any of those pieces. This is a fun pattern to do in fat quarters, but it also is a great pattern for only 2 different fabrics. If you are going to use 2 different fabrics, you're going to need approximately 1 yard of 2 different fabrics each and approximately half a yard for some binding. My baby quilt with 1 big block using 8 fat quarters, and I can't remember even what I said, is now done. The quilt does end up being 35.5 inches. And there wasn't a lot of piecing involved. The whole key is pressing that fabric well. Don't press it as you go along and let the machine do all the work. I do hope you give it a try. The templates make it really easy because it is accurate. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe and, well, come on back. Let's see what we're sewing next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.